you, yes, it did happen before. But, is it always going to be in my head? Yes, it's always going to be in my head. But am I going to go ahead and reflect that in hatred? No, there's two options to this. One, you want to go ahead and set up right and provide equality to everyone. And you want to do the best you can to go ahead and make that happen. Or two, you become hatred, right? You hate. I'm not that kind of person, as you guys all know. I want to work with everyone so we can provide equality for all. Again, and I think Tina is absolutely right about this. This is a systemic issue. I wish I can, say tomorrow is going to be fair for everyone, but it's not going to. And it's just, the American culture, the family upbringing and whatever and so on. It just takes time. But I can tell you that, when I grew up in the 70s or 80s, it's so different nowadays. You don't see the same kind of issues as I saw when I was, growing up. I think eventually, we all have to all get along. We should. Why shouldn't we? We all are, we all have blood, and it's always going to be red. We should always take care of each other, and that's what I believe in. You want me to get into, Tina, why Asian male become entrepreneurs?
I was just going to ask you, Sam. So it's funny because to me you just gave kind of a perfect segue into our next speaker, because you were talking about how different it is now than when you were growing up. Mm-hmm. And our next speaker is Casper. And Casper Glenn has been a member of our club actually since 1994. He is an honorary member now. And you can see from his bio, he was born in 1922, 98 and a half years old. He was educated in segregated elementary school in the town of Winsboro, and then attended Coulter Academy Presbyterian Boarding High School in Cheraw, South Carolina, and graduated from Lincoln University, the oldest college for Blacks, which was founded in 1854. Thurgood Marshall and Kwame Nkrumah, the first president of Ghana, West Africa, who later led his country to independence, had attended there prior to Casper. So what I want to comment on is that I've known Casper for a number of years, and Casper has quite a story to tell of what he came through in terms of his own experience and his opportunity to serve with Martin Luther King. So with that, I'm going to go to the questions. Oh, sorry, it goes on, as you can see. I'm going to let you guys read that. Casper joined Kiwanis August 23rd of 1994 and is currently a honorary member, and he is a resident of Westminster Gardens, and we're so thrilled to have him with us today. So the questions for Casper, again, Casper, can you share some personal experiences that have impacted you negatively because of your race, and how have you used those opportunities to achieve positive outcomes?
I think the thing that impacted me most negatively was in the area of education. I grew up in a rural area 10 miles from the nearest town, and 2 years before I started school, our community got its first building or school that looked like a school. My brothers and sisters who were older than I went to a school, it was a one-teacher school. They had benches instead of seats. They had tables that our parents made. And the school was in session only 3 months out of the year. When I started school in 1927, I started school in a building that was brand new. It was made possible by a grant by Julius Rosenwald, a New Jersey philanthropist. some of you may remember a director of our library by the name of Rosenwald. He was the librarian when I came in 26 years ago. He was the grand nephew of Julius Rosenwald. The Rosenwald schools were made possible with a grant from Julius Rosenwald and the community. That meant the Black community. My parents were very much involved in raising funds to build the school that I was able to attend. It was called the New Hope School, a very nice building that had been made possible by this grant from Julius Rosenwald and the African-American people in our community. The school district hired the teachers, however, and they made sure that we didn't have a teacher in our school except for the principal who had gone beyond high school. As a matter of fact, half of our teachers had gone only to junior high, because that in our county, there was not a high school for African Americans. Even when I reached high school, I could go only to the 9th grade in my county. The white schools were in session 9 months out of the year. The kids rode a bus, even back in 1927. I lived 3 miles from my school, and I had to walk. Our school was in session, as I mentioned, only 5 months out of the year, while the white kids went 9 months. When I finished elementary school, the nearest school for me was 10 miles away. And while my elementary school was only 3 miles away, I was able to go and live with one of my dad's sisters who lived 4 miles from our little town, where there was a school that went through the 9th grade. And it meant walking 4 miles a day, every day. If the weather was good, it was not too hard, but the road was not paved, and it was used largely by big logging trucks. And I used to have to wear boots and then take them off when I got to school because it would be all covered with mud. I remember taking biology in the 9th grade, and we didn't have a single instrument, nothing. And can you imagine? We had no books in our library. We had a room for a library, but no books except what we bought. Not only that, in our little town, country town, there was a library that was operated by money provided through taxes. My parents had to pay tax like everybody else. But I couldn't borrow a book. In fact, as a matter of fact, as long as I lived in South Carolina, I never was able to read a book that was paid for by taxpayers. I remember one day standing across the street from my library in a little park and seeing white kids go in and out. And they are crying my heart out because I wanted to borrow a book. But because of my race, I couldn't. So every book that I read in those days were paid for by money I saved upon money that my parents gave me. Our school for blacks was 5 months out of the year. I remember when I was about in the sixth grade, our parents got together and met with the teachers to see if they would be willing to teach for a 6 month. As our school always began the first Tuesday of November and ended the first Friday of March, while the white kids started the day after Labor Day and closed Friday before Memorial Day. When I finished, I went to the school in our town for 2 years. Then the Episcopal Church opened a school about 6 miles away. But unfortunately, it was not a very good school. The priest was a good teacher, but he didn't have another teacher who had gone me on junior college, and a mere poor one at that. But when I reached the 11th grade, my parents sent me and my sister, who was just older than I, to a school that was operated by the Presbyterian Church some 100 miles away. But to get there by bus, I had to go 30 miles south to Columbia and then 90 miles east to a place called Cheraw. That school was funded by Presbyterian women all across the country. Their teachers were really dedicated. They were good teachers. And I felt that in those years, I was able to, for the first time, take advantage of outstanding teachers. We had a good library. And I will never forget the day I graduated from high school, when I walked up on the stage to get my diploma, and I turned and looked out at the audience. I remember a saying I'd heard many, many a time, and that was, this school is made possible because Presbyterian women all over America love you and want you to have a chance. And I wanted to reach out and get that audience, symbolic of all the women across America, and to say, thank you for what you've done. And so when I finished high school, I was then able to get a scholarship to go to Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. Lincoln University was an outgrowth of the Underground Railroad. If you saw the film,
Harriet.
what's the name?
Harriet?
Harriet, yes. Remember Harriet conducted people across the Delaware? Well, there was another major river, the Susquehanna, and mostly men went that route. And just about 20 miles north of the Mason-Dixon line, a little town called Oxford, Pennsylvania. And there was a Presbyterian church there, Oxford First Presbyterian Church. The pastor there became interested in runaway slaves who made their way there, and the church had a large basement. And so they made arrangements to house them there. And these boys begged him to teach them how to read. Mm. And he was just overwhelmed with their eagerness to learn how to read. His parents owned a tract of land some 4 miles away that they were doing a little farming on it. And this pastor convinced his parents to give that tract of land to the Presbyterian Church to start a school for runaway slaves. And that was the beginning of what became Lincoln University, which was chartered in 1854. Many of the early leaders in the African American community, particularly from Virginia North, were graduates of Lincoln University. Thurgood Marshall, the first African American to serve on the Supreme Court, was a student at Lincoln University, an outstanding student. I remember the joy I had when I met him for the first time. He was about 12 years ahead of me. Thurgood Marshall was the lead counsel in the case in which African Americans sued the state of South Carolina for the right to vote. Because before 1946, African Americans were not allowed to vote in the state of South Carolina and as many other states. One of the happiest days of my life was the day I made a trip to South Carolina to take my mother and father into our old town 10 miles away to see them go to the polls to vote. Now I remember my mother had on a beautiful white dress and a hat, and she was so proud as she walked down the street. And my dad was all dressed with his white shirt and tie. And I sat in my car, my watch, and I couldn't help but cry, but at the same time rejoice. Mm-hmm. To see my parents, who had worked so hard, they had brought. My dad was very active in helping to raise funds to High Council to bring a suit against the state of South Carolina to gain the right to vote. And so in the early spring of 1946, the Third District Court in Charleston, South Carolina, ruled that African Americans had the right to register to vote as everybody else. Because the state of South Carolina appealed the decision. And I had the privilege of being in Baltimore when the case reached the district court. And I remember the Attorney General of South Carolina saying to the court, if the decision of the district court is allowed to stand, there'll be interracial marriages all over the place. And Thurgood Marshall said, apparently, no, he said, what the judge says, that every white woman is stupid. If a black man asks her to marry him, she doesn't have brains enough to say no.
Casper, I have to tell you, this has been fabulous. I'm sorry we're running out of time for you, but I want to thank you for sharing that perspective of how far we've come. Good grief to not be able to borrow a book in the library, and for you to share the experience of your parents voting for the first time is really so heartwarming. I wanted to let you know that our next person. Okay, does anybody, I'm sorry, let me take a little break here. I understand Sam can't stay on too long. I just want to make sure, are there any questions anybody might have for Sam? You can put them into the chat for me.
I can stay a little bit longer, but I do have a hard stop. I do apologize. I have a full-time job also. I work 3 jobs as an Asian American. So And I'm doing a lot of PPEs right now. We're selling a lot of PPEs to the needed, especially different hospitals as they spike. So I can stay a little bit longer, but I do have a hard stop because I need to finish this RFQ for the, it's a huge school district I need to go ahead and take care of, and I do apologize.
Okay, so I do have a question for you. What are you doing today to promote economic opportunities for people of color within the city of Duarte?
You know, it's got to be fair. I really believe in fair. And I think, Dan, if you're on, and Liz, you know, and I'm always talking about fairness. It can't be just for one group or the other or someone, you know, special group or whatever and so on. It should be for all. And I have been working with JB from Foothill before, probably 2 times. I even brought in, I worked with Grace Napolitano for an export seminar and how to go ahead and become entrepreneurs and so on. I've done so many different things in the city of Duarte to create our, economic opportunities. What are we doing? One thing, you know, we have been working with City of Hope, not lately though, but you know, they're growing very, very well. City of Hope is the largest, they're the largest employer in the San Gabriel Valley. They employ probably close to 6,000 to 7,000 people. And with the expansion right now that Liz and I and along the other council members, we all agreed, it's going to go up to maybe additional 3,000 more. So you're going to see about 10,000 more people working here in Duarte, which is a great thing, right? We need to go ahead and create jobs. Furthermore, for the longest time, as you guys all know, people have always been saying, hey, we're not going to have a town center. We're not going to be having a town center. My cup is always half full. It's never, ever half empty. It just, that's how I am. I'm pretty progressive, and I strive, and I never, ever say no. I want to go ahead and make it happen. So we're about to go ahead and get a hotel in the Buena Vista and Huntington area. Right below that, we're going to go ahead and do mixed use and have some retail shops. And Filippo, maybe that might be something good for you later on. It's going to have a restaurant and then a coffee, or the space enough for I think it's 2,500, and then the other one is about 1,500. Right down at the bottom. What are we trying to go ahead and do? We're trying to go ahead and make an atmosphere where people can go ahead and congregate at that location. So once that hotel is going to be done, that will be great. How many jobs is that going to go ahead and create? I think it's going to create at least 300 jobs over there. So these jobs are not just for one group of people, whatever and so on, it's for all. Furthermore, we're trying to go ahead and do the biotechnology corridor. We're called a city of health. Why is it that we're not able to go ahead and attract these good quality jobs that we so desperately need into our city? If we're able to go ahead and do some of these biotechnology incubators right next to City of Hope at the TOD site, the transit-oriented site, a development site, that'll be great. And I have instructed Mr. Hensley. That will be something that we should look into. I'm sure Mr. Hensley is looking into. These are the jobs of the future. What are the jobs of the future? It's not going to be truck driver. Automation is taking over. Even if you start thinking about it, do we even need, you know, street lights in the future when you have automations? You probably don't even need street lights. So if you don't have to drive, do you need driver license? Right? You probably don't need driver license. Do you need insurance, auto insurance, when all these cars will not crash? Now, this I'm talking about probably in about 10 to 15 more years, you will see all these automations starts to come. So you still have to go ahead and start thinking, what kind of jobs are still good? I can tell you right now, healthcare is still good, because all the baby boomers will continue on to go ahead and get older. And I myself, you know, Gen X, I think. You know, people like us will always be older, and we're always going to need healthcare. So I think healthcare, big data is so huge right now. is so needed. People need to understand that data centers are needed. Acquiring data, understanding data, how to go ahead and clean up data, using data to go ahead and give you information. Information gives you knowledge. Knowledge gives you directions of what your entity, your establishment, your corporations, City of Hope Hospital, whatever the directions you need to go. So there are a lot of jobs in data and so on. In healthcare and hospitality, I think is still going to be good. But unfortunately, during this administration's really just turned things upside down, really upside down. That there's a lot of people from all over the world able to go ahead and congregate and come to Southern California, and they spend billions and billions of dollars. But a lot of these people now are deterred because of this current atmosphere and administration. They go somewhere else to go ahead and spend their money. So hospitality, I hope, is going to go ahead and come back and be good. And one more thing I've been talking to a lot of people about, and this is prior to this administration's, and I'm very, very against with the ideas, what they're trying to go ahead and do. American protectionisms. I'm not about that. And there was two groups of people in the administration during that time. It was American protectionisms or globalization. I really believe in globalizations, and I'll tell you why. We as Americans.
Sam, I'm so sorry. We love hearing all of this, but I got to move on. Can we take
one more thing? I just want to go ahead and tell you one more thing really quick.
Okay.
We should be creating good American products and sell to the world, especially to China, because the Chinese middle class right now is so eager to buy good quality American or good quality products. Because we've been fighting with them, we're not able to go ahead and create these jobs. If we would have been able to create these factories, to create these good quality products, we'll be selling so much to China. And I'll tell you this, every dollar you're able to go and sell to America, you can sell 5. So you can make 5 times more right now. But unfortunately, because of this atmosphere, things are just not working out.
Thank you, Sam. So I want to move on to our next guest, Dr. Tuttle.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm going to bring up your bio here, I think. My Vanna is working on that. Dr. Tuttle is actually joining us from Azusa Pacific, right?
Yes.
He's a researcher and practitioner who works to reduce community-level crime and violence, including drug markets, illicit firearm trafficking, gangs, and organized criminal groups with youth crime. He's been working with this for over 20 years. I'm going to let you guys read all of this quickly because we're going to move on to his questions. I'm aware of all your time, and I want to make sure we get Lois in here next too. So
me too.
Okay. So we have different questions for Dr. Tuttle.
Oh, you're not going to ask me the same questions as everybody else?
No, we're going to ask you something a little bit different. Let's see. So I'm going to ask you, can you talk about the idea of systemic racism and then discuss how you can serve as a white ally during this time of change?
Sure. So I want to put things into context, and I think I want to try to keep my comment short because I think hearing from other members of the panel is more important than hearing from me right now. And as I like to say, professors love to profess. So I'm going to try to keep my comments short. Keep me on 5 minutes if you would. So first of all, there's this idea of implicit bias. You've heard these terms thrown a lot around in the news, I'm sure, and I'm just going to try to give us context. So implicit bias is the idea that we all have these implicit stereotypes and ideas about groups of people, about individuals, and that these are unconscious ideas, right? And we need to be ever vigilant about those ideas, right? About those concepts, right? So you see somebody in a wheelchair, for example. I'm in a wheelchair, so I'll use that example. You see somebody in a wheelchair and you might assume that they might have some mental issues, right? For example. Racism itself is the idea that people are different based on their based on their race, right? So that you might make a comment like, well, they're like this because they're, and then you can fill in the blank. They drive like this because they're like this, right? They're like this because they're that group, right? When we talk about systemic racism, which used to be called institutional racism, right? This is the idea that those ideas about race have now been institutionalized. They're part of the normal operation of organization and societies, right? And they are systemic, and they occur in the criminal justice system, employment, housing, healthcare, politics, across the board. And you've heard some of that already today. I really appreciate you and Ada putting together the statistics, so I didn't have to this time. I usually have to be the one with the PowerPoints and the statistics. What I will say to you, though, is that it's really important that we understand that what I call radical social mobility, the idea that we move up or down compared to where our parents were. So my father worked construction, my mom did bookkeeping. I moved up 2 levels above them. I'm a college professor, right? I'm white collar, they were kind of blue collar. That only occurs about 5% of the time in our society, right? So we add to that this idea of systemic racism. That means that access to that level of social mobility, up or down, occurs less for people of color than it does for somebody like me. And so what I hear a lot from people is when we start having this conversation is that they say, well, I didn't do anything, like I didn't own slaves, or they'll say something like that. And it's important to understand that, first of all, when people are sharing their experience with you, they're not blaming you personally for these experiences. They're sharing their experiences with you, right? And that if somebody has suffered in an economic model, right? If somebody has suffered from that model, then you have benefited from that model. So I have benefited from that economic model as a white male, then anybody who's not white male, right, has not benefited from that model. So that's really important to keep sort of at the forefront of your mind as I continue. Another just couple of side things, people like to say, well, I don't see color, or I don't see race. And that is a dumb thing to say, because that is who we are as people, right? I'm in a wheelchair. I can't go downstairs. And so it would be silly for you to say, well, I don't see ability. Why can't you walk down the stairs? Similarly, Lois is an African-American woman. I'm going to use you, Lois. Lois is an African-American woman, right? So you wouldn't say, well, I don't see race, Lois. She's an African-American woman. That's part of her experience as a person. And so we need to be clear about these things. Now, clearly we've come a long way from where Pastor Glenn talked about his experiences to today, but we have a long way to go. And we could sit here all day. I could teach an entire class discussing racial inequalities in our society. We could spend an entire semester doing that, and I won't, because you'll pass out. But what I will say is that any data in if racism is systemic, then it exists in every aspect of our society, right? And so I, as a Christian, because APU is a Christian organization as well, so I, as a Christian, believe that you have to work to help others, right, ascend, right, and you have to create social justice, right? We have to work towards social justice, as not just as a professor, right, but as a Christian. And I have to work. So when we talk about white allyship, I have to work with the tools that I have from the position that I am at in society to try to help others, right, who are being mistreated, who don't have social justice. And I'm just going to use sort of these 8 points for people to think about. And I'm happy to answer questions. If we don't have time today, You can share my academic email. I'm happy to answer questions via email. Number one, the Lord gave you resources. He gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. You should use those resources accordingly. You need to listen to people's stories, and you need to hear what they have to say and not try to talk over them in your own defense. You have to pay attention to where power is, particularly right now. Pay attention to where things are focused and who actually has the power. You have to see how race and issues of racism are being denied, minimized, and justified. You need to educate yourself on issues of racism within your particular area of study. If you work in education, there's a lot of work, there's a lot of research done there. I work in criminal justice. I can assure you there's a lot of work done in that area. You need to understand your positionality in society. And what I mean by that is maybe you have power in certain areas of society and you don't have power in other areas of society. You need to understand where you are in terms of your position in society, and work to stand against social injustice all the time, everywhere that you can. You need to learn about white people who, if you're a white ally, you need to learn about white people who have been part of these social movements the entire time as well. There have been people from the church who have been part of these social movements, and they have done this. And then I would say share the message. We need to educate others, right? Which I do every semester. We need to educate others on these issues. So I'm trying to really be mindful of time, because I think as a white ally, I want to uplift the voices of others. So I'm going to keep my comments there, but if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
So any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. And before I introduce Lois, I just want to comment to all of you that we are, of course, looking for new members to help Kiwanis in Duarte along with our mission. And I want to thank Sandra from Allegra Consulting, who's in the process of hopefully joining. Wanted to recognize, thank you for being on the call today.
Yay!
And now it's my honor to introduce Lois Gaston, who many of you already know. Lois is a former mayor and city council member for the city of Duarte. She became a member of the Duarte City Council in 2003 and was elected as mayor on November 28, 2006. She is the first and only African-American woman to hold the mayoral position in the city's 50-year history. It's more than 50 years now. In March 2009, she was named the 44th Assembly District Woman of the Year by Assemblyman Portantino. And some of her notable accomplishments are membership in the San Gabriel Valley Council of Governments and the Southern California Association of Governments, as well as serving as the state recruitment coordinator for AARP in California. She enjoyed a career at AT&T for 32 years before retiring in 1989 as a district manager of human resources. She's a mother of 4 children, grandmother of 10, and great-grandmother of 8. And with that, I pass the baton to my friend Lois Gaston. And you know the question, Lois. Share an experience and tell us how you turn that into a positive.
Let me just, before I do, say thank you to all of you for this opportunity. I really feel that I'm not capable of being there, but I have experienced racism, and I want to show you how a portion of that got turned around. But for the sake of the Key Club members that's on, let me say this. I was born in 1937 out of wedlock on my grandparents' 40 acres in Taylor, Arkansas. That's air property that we still own today. I don't know what happened to the mule, but we still got the 40 acres. The only school I attended in the Deep South was held in a one-room wooden building that had one wood stove. Black children of all ages huddled around this stove. There was no electricity, no running water, no cafeteria, no indoor bathrooms. We sat on benches and used our laps to read, write, and do arithmetic. I was fortunate because I went to school every day it was in session. However, some of my schoolmates their families were sharecroppers. And so like Casper, they could only come to school when it wasn't time to plant or to reap the crops. Black migration in the 1940s caused my mother to go north twice and then west to California. And I attended integrated schools in the Bay Area and San Diego and then in Monrovia. I graduated from Monrovia High School in 1953, attended Mount Sac, married and started a family, and then dropped out of college a year and a half later. So now you see why I don't deserve to be on this panel with all of these college graduates, because I'm a college dropout. But let me tell you, I did get a job with Pacific Telephone. I was hired in 1957 in Pasadena after I was denied a job because of my race in Alhambra. The interviewer told me that the phone company didn't hire people that looked like me, and I was devastated because even though I had witnessed discrimination and a lynching in the South, as well as traveling in the colored-only train cars across country several times, I had forgotten that race was a big deal. And this was the first time that it really kind of hit me in my gut. But my career with a telephone company lasted, as you said, 32 years. I was denied promotions several times because of my race and my gender. Yes, but for those same reasons, I also got very positive achievements. And let me see if I can quickly tell you what those were. My manager at the time I was denied these promotions felt that if I had been promoted into directory sales, where male whites were predominantly there, they worked on commissions and made big bucks, that if I went there, that they would find a way to get rid of me, and because they did not want women, nor did they want blacks in that department. So he asked me to wait, and I waited. And when I finally did get promoted a year or so later, my salary was reviewed every 6 months, and I also got maximum dollars. Compared to some of the people that I worked with at that level, whose salary wasn't reviewed until 18 months, and they were given minimum raises. So as a result, I was able to build a reputation where when the next job came along and the next opportunity came along that was a good fit for me, no problem, because no one felt that a person who wasn't competent would have been promoted or would get to top pay that fast. So the reason I tell that story is because when a door is closed on you and you can't break through the ceiling, guess what? If one person has the courage to open that door and you take advantage of it, it can make the difference all the way through your life. And as a result, I was able to get promoted again and again, and was able to retire, and for that reason have enjoyed a very lucrative retirement, volunteering and serving. So with that, let me close it off because I know we're short on time. And if anybody wants my story, email me. I'll send you the whole scripted saga.
Yeah. So I want to pass it back for a moment to Ada. We had one more panelist, and I want to give her a couple of minutes. She is an amazing resource for the city of Duarte. Those of you who are in Duarte know this. If you don't, Ada, you want to pull your bio back up for me? This young lady is actually an immigrant from Peru, folks. I don't know if you all know that. And she is working with our public safety area, and she is a wonderful advocate for the youth in our community. She has been responsible for huge grants, thank you, God. And it's an honor to have her as one of our members of Kiwanis. And with that, Ada, why don't you tell a quick story as well? I didn't want to leave you out.
Thank you. Well, in the interest of time, I'll get to the story that that I was going to share, especially for those young people. Well, in Peru, I always felt like I belonged at home, at school. But when I moved to this country, I suddenly did not belong, and I had to learn a new language and culture, and it was a complete culture shock for me. And this was a reality I struggled, but I coped with it. I even made sense of what people would say, like, you know, immigrants came here to, you know, take stuff from us that belongs to us. You know, I could cope with that. That was okay. You know, I could understand. But as I became older, this reality started to come from adults in charge of my future. That's when it was not okay. My high school counselor, he was a white male that grew up during segregation. He informed me that I could not take advanced placement classes because this type of challenge was completely unnecessary for somebody like myself. And what he meant was a Latina immigrant. He literally said to me, it was not something I needed to get a job or be a mother, because that was going to be my future. You know, just getting a job out of high school and become a mother. And I should not challenge myself, you know, because I wouldn't need this to graduate high school. He just did not see what I saw in myself. You know, I always knew I had to go to college. You know, I knew this is the only way I could get out of poverty, by going to school and educating myself. You know, but for a teen who just scored out of ESL classes, which is English learner classes, to him, I was just an immigrant, and no way that I was going to get the classes I wanted or needed, you know. This was like a punch to the face, you know, and I can share it now because it all worked out okay. I was able to go to college and get through my goals in life. But this statement just, you know, it was just 20 years ago. And I'm sure some of our students still experience that at school, because I work and they tell me, you know, so this, you know, it was only 20 years ago and it still happens today. So what I did was I knew I had to keep quiet because I couldn't sit there and fight with somebody that's a superior. I was also taught that, you know, coming from a different country, you know, you always respect your elders. So I kept quiet, and, you know, it was not the first time that an adult treated me this way or became racist towards me. What I did was I called on my old high school counselor, because I had moved from New Jersey to Monrovia. And, you know, I called on this non-nonsense Jewish woman. She was the only person in my school career that treated me like I had a brain, I had feelings, and I had the ability to do what I wanted. And, you know, she supported me. So I called her. I was here in California and I called her. And in this situation, she's like, don't worry, I'll call him. And she was able to make a difference. You know, this is something I had to learn to do on my own then. Unfortunately, this is a strategy that I sometimes still use in certain situations in my career. You know, she came to the rescue, and I strongly believe that, like Dr. Ted Hill say, you know, we need allies. You know, you need to network, and that's what we tell our young people. You know, you need to volunteer, work hard, and network. And that's what we mean by networking. You need to learn things outside your culture. You need to, you know, associate with everybody, not somebody that looks like you. You need to learn about everyone so that you can make this into an experience that's going to benefit you as well. Because you never know who can help you, who can be your ally. So I think the best way to fight systemic racism is to look for positive allies, you know, and use these negative experiences to drive you into positive outcomes. You know, you can't let anything take you down. You use that and you empower yourself and you take that forward. Yeah. So that's it in a little bit of time.
Thank you, Ada. Wow. That was wonderful. Some great stories from my folks. Amazing. And it is being recorded. So I'm going to pass the baton back to our president, I believe. Oh, I do have one more quote. You know, we lost a giant in our country this past week, John Lewis. Woo! And I wanted to share his quote here. I believe in freedom of speech, but I also believe that we have an obligation to condemn speech that is racist, bigoted, anti-Semitic, or hateful. That's it. I'm going to pass that to Kay.
Thank you, Tina. Thank you so much. And thank you to our panelists. Do we have any last questions that anyone wants to ask of them?
I I have a question.
Yes, Lois?
I have a question for Ada. Ada, do you feel you are discriminated against now? You don't have to be specific about where, but do you personally feel that that is kind of a weight, that someone has their foot on your neck now?
Honestly, there are always times where you're going to feel that way. Once you start becoming aware of what goes on in the world and society, there'll always be a time when you're going to feel it. I'm sure you can attest to that as well.
Thank you. And Louis, I have one question for you.
Yes.
I have a difficult time trying to verbalize what you said. Is there a way that you can give us your 8 points?
Absolutely.
Can you email that to us, because I think it's going to be very helpful to me and to some other folks that I speak with about how to handle the questions when I'm talking to a white audience.
Absolutely. And if
That'd be great.
And if you want me to come talk to a white audience, I'm happy to do that too. I'm not scared.
Awesome.
Tina?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Tina, I've got 2 questions.
Yes.
I've got one for Ada and I've got one for Casper. Casper, you mentioned something about the cadre of African-American leaders that graduated from the school that you went to, or college that you went to. Can you just touch upon the difference between that cadre of folks that graduated during that time frame and the present African-American leaders in the group or in the greater society? For Ada, I'd like for you to tell me, I come from the same kind of background you came from. I was a small child when I came here. However, the question I have for you is, do you think you would obtain the same level of leadership as well as influence that you have today, you command today, in the job you're in here, as opposed to the country you came from? So those are the 2 questions I have.
So Casper, you want to go first?
Okay, I'm trying to formulate the question. Would you ask the question again?
I think Filippo was commenting that you spoke of some of the men that graduated from that college during your time or just before it. Thurgood Marshall was one of them. And he asked if you see a difference between that generation or cadre of graduates compared to the folks who are in leadership positions who are African American today. Is that it, Filippo?
That is it.
Okay.
Not really. The earlier group of pioneers, they came up against more walls than today. Life is still difficult for African Americans. Believe me that, and you see it in every area. But I don't think we have quite as much opposition now as we did then, but we still have it.
Okay. Ada, how about you?
Great
Do you
question.
feel you would have had similar opportunity in Peru?
Well, I do have friends that I still keep in touch with in Peru, and some have become lawyers and very influential, and others haven't been so successful. I do think that by coming to this country, my parents gave me the opportunity to get social mobility. I think it's a lot easier. My country is also diverse, and it also has a history of slavery, which has a lot of racism within the society as well. So I don't think I would have become as successful. It's difficult to say, though. Like I said, I have friends that I keep in touch with, and some of them are incredibly successful, while others didn't become as successful. I think it's also within the drive and the opportunity. I know, but this is a country where the African American, President Obama, his father was an immigrant from Africa who was a goat herder. Where else would you see that type of, ability to, go so socially mobile, from that background to being president of the free world, So I thank my parents for bringing me to this country, and I think that if it wasn't for us moving here, I wouldn't have had the chance to escape poverty, by working hard and getting an education and having the good fortune of surrounding myself good mentors like Lois and all of you who are willing to seize potential and give somebody a chance. I think it's difficult to say, but I'm very blessed to be in this position, and I wouldn't trade it.
Thank you, Ada.
I can say this, that I moved to my wife and I moved to Westminster Gardens 26 years ago tomorrow. In those 26 years, there have been only 2 other African Americans. And today there are just 2 of us left.
Wow.
I think it's a matter, those who have a responsibility for recruiting.
Yeah.
Avoid the African American community.
Interesting. Okay.
I know that our time is up, but I do want to mention one thing. You'll notice that the death rate from the pandemic is desperately affecting people of color, and it's they're all linked. They're all linked to education and dollars earned, being able to live in safe neighborhoods, and being able to get a break. And the difficulty is that today we're experiencing the same kind of disastrous results that were evident when Casper was a young man and when I was a young woman. And we're and I'm grateful for being an American. I'm not bitter at all, but I really wonder why this continues to happen, because the end result is life or death for people. So please keep that in mind, that something has to get better in order for babies of all colors to have an opportunity to earn a living, to live in a great home, to live in a safe neighborhood, to have health insurance and not die in case there's a pandemic. That's all I needed to say.